So welcome to the Inviting Shift Show. I'm Christina Smith, and I am the host of the show. I love to hear people's big ahas and shifts that they have in life. I think that they're so important to share and something that we don't often talk about in natural conversation. So I like to bring them out there. And so I have guests on every week to share their big shifts and how they got there and how they implemented those big ahas. And this week we have Vidal Cisneros. I'm sorry, I'm having a lisp of my own today, and that's not a good name for a lisp. And he's going to talk to us about how he really made huge shifts in his life and from the inside out. And I've heard pieces of it, and I'm really interested in listening to it. But before, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Christina.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure and an honor being here. And I am an author, speaker, and purpose igniting coach. And last year, I was featured in a book that you might know. It's called Chicken Soup for the Soul. And the iteration of it was Think Possible. So this is going to tie in. If you stay till the end, this will tie into my story. So you're going to want to stay till the end. It's a cool story. And years back, I was just a person that was shifting into this new identity, and I was going through this little crisis. Am I doing the right thing? Should I be leaving a career that pays me well and that could have potentially led me to retire and possibly live off my 401k? So I took a huge leap of faith, and that kind of pretty much catapulted this dream chasing journey. And now that's led me to become a speaker, author, and purpose igniting coach, just in a small nutshell.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm excited to hear about this shift, because I think, I always think that those people that are out there speaking and telling, they've always wanted to do that. And for me to start shifting into that, it had to be a label that I started putting on myself and something that I really stepped into myself. Whatever that dream is, you really have to step into it. And when it's something new, I think it can be challenging. And, even more so, I really relate to this when your life is really good on paper and you're like, well, I'm not quite happy though. And then that's when because it sounds like, you were all set with this job and this 401k and you could retire. And then you were like, well, why don't I try this other way that's not so sure and not so steady. So I love stories like this, because that was totally me. So go ahead, tell me all about yours. I'm sure it's not the same as mine.
Well, that last season that I was a project manager for a pretty large southeastern Wisconsin road construction company, I burnt myself out. But it was a blessing in disguise, because that leveraged so much of my energy out of that career. Excuse me. And that's where that first step shifted everything. So it didn't begin with me saying, hey, I can see the bridge ahead. I know what it looks like. Let me do it. I had no idea what I was in store for. Mm-hmm. And that career shift ignited the biggest obstacles that I faced my whole life. And little did I know that my wife at the time also had a little shift, but hers was into the arms of another man. And that was a blessing in disguise as well, because I had no idea how bad it was. I was a workaholic, like maybe many of you viewers are. And you mentioned too yourself, you were a workaholic, you're burnt out. I was working 90 plus hours, 2 weeks in a row. I did that, and I averaged my last season 80 some hours. It was insane. But that led me to believe that anything is possible if I really set my mind to it. And I knew that I'm done chasing the dream for someone else. I'm going to start chasing my own dream. So then I hired a success coach, put a lot of skin in the game, as in thousands of dollars. And that led to a lot of groundbreaking insight from my mental shift, my just personal development growth, just exponentially grew. I felt like almost like a born again Christian. If that's kind of how I could say. I felt saved. right?
Right, free, a lot freer than you were, I'm sure. And that's familiar to me. And I love that you pointed out, it's not like I just had this dream one day and was like, I go after it. A lot of like bricks, it sounded like, fell on your head, that somebody else could have taken, like, oh, my life's a disaster, I don't know what to do now. But you really, and I think many people tend to take those instances, and that's when we become strongest and we start being able to see possibility. Um, when
Yes.
some options are taken away from us, all of a sudden we have to rethink that portion of our life. Like when a relationship ends, then we're like, oh, do I want to be in a relationship? What kind of person would I want to be in a relationship with if this isn't it? And I think with the job too, I mean, that can be detrimental to so many people. And I know somebody that hates to fire people.
Hmm.
And yet I always look at it like that's part of their next journey. Like it's not your responsibility to keep people that don't fit with company, but they have to be able to see that that's an opportunity for them. I think that sometimes we don't see the opportunities and the bad things, and I'm sure that that's where you're going with this, because
Hmm. Yeah,
it's
career.
really sad.
Yes, Christine, career-wise, you're spot on. I had I knew I had to burn that bridge just so I wouldn't go back, because later on, just kind of highlighting some points later on, I would try to go back to that. And I was like, no, 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 no. I'm not going back to that. That's not me. It's so embedded and ingrained in your neural pathways that it's hard to break the old patterns.
Mhm.
So my wife at the time came to a point, even though I was lit up on fire, honestly, I didn't care what she was doing. I was like, you know what? She would never do that to me. She would never cheat on me.
Mhm.
And little did I know that it was going to be such a climactic point in the journey that it stopped me dead in my tracks, made me evaluate who I was, and it actually spiraled me into a downward depression. And because of her confessing, not only that she was seeing somebody, and I had this sixth sense like all of us do, but we're in denial. That's the first phase of it, is denial. Yes. And
It's
then,
easier.
yes, we deny it. No, no, it can't be me. And then finally it came to that point of no return where she said, I'm pregnant and it's not yours.
Mhm.
And I felt, I fell further into the state of denial, and I wanted to fix it. So I hired a couples therapist, the best that money could buy. And in 5 minutes, he sat us down. And in 5 minutes, we walked right out. All he asked her was, do you still want to make this work? No. And all along, she was stringing me. She was playing both sides of the fence, didn't know what she wanted. And then with her being pregnant, it was just a no brainer that she couldn't, excuse me, she couldn't just stay in that marriage. Not like that.
Right.
And then I had to make that big decision. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into building this lifestyle, this home, this family environment, this dynamic, and then you have to watch it all crumble. So as the career shifted, so did my marriage and family life, and I watched everything crumble, and that was the most painful part. But it was almost as if everything that didn't serve me had to be tore away from my life, had to be just destroyed out of my life, as hard and painful as that was. And there's a reason for everything. So that depression led me to a point where I was actually plastered all over the news. Working in the road construction industry, I had very great relationships with law enforcement. So I knew a lot of sheriff deputies by first name. We worked together. We were colleagues. And to make it more ironic, I got to that point where I felt that I had my get free out of jail card, and I was driving inebriated at night to numb the pain, because I would suppress it with alcohol. And then I needed to get that adrenaline back. Working on the freeways made me an adrenaline junkie. I missed it. So I got behind the wheel, nothing I recommend. And I drove erratically, and I was a speed demon. Finally caught up to me because I was out of control. So plastered all over the news. In a high-speed chase, I ended up losing a sheriff deputy twice. And then I ended up crashing into another inebriated driver. And that day marked just a point of no return for myself, as in I had to start from square one. Thank God the driver that I ended up hitting only had a broken collarbone. So I had to serve 6 months in the House of Corrections. And you might think that that wasn't a vacation, but because of what I was facing in my own life, it actually was the best thing for me.
Yeah, it gave you some time to go internal. It sounds like, right? Yeah, it gave you time to really think about, where am I? How am I getting here? Where am I going?
Yes, absolutely. It was depressing watching that spiral just go downward. But this is where the aha moment comes in. Sitting in jail when I first got arrested for those 4 days, I was going through withdrawals with alcohol, and you're in a cell and all you're doing is just pleading with God. Like, why me? Like, come on, God, why am I going through this? Is this not enough? It was like torture. I felt as if the whole universe was conspiring against me. But that's what I focused on. What you focus on, as you might know, it expands. And I would take a walk in the park, and I would see pregnant mothers, soon expecting mothers. And I was like, God, this is just torture. But it taught me the most powerful lesson I could have learned is that when we step outside of the pain and not so much embrace it, but bless it, just say, God bless that mother, or God bless, my estranged wife and the man she's seeing in the unborn child. And I started doing that consistently, Christina. And I did it to plant those seeds and to internally begin the transformation, because as you know, Christina, it starts from the inside out. Absolutely. That's the only way transformation begins. Mm-hmm. So for those 4 days I was incarcerated, I fasted, I prayed, I gave away my trays to other people that were reading the Bible or reading self-help books. And then in the library there, inside of that jail dorm that I was staying in, there was a book inside of that library. It was called Chicken Soup for the Soul. This book, I had never read it in my life. It was the original, the one that was published back in 1993. And I thought at first some of those stories were super cheesy. I was like, come on, you got to be kidding me. This is what's everybody's been talking about with Chicken Soup for the Soul. But as I kept reading story after story after story, it began to feed my soul. It began to give me hope. In giving me hope, I realized that maybe if I get through this, Christina, my story might be in there. Now, that was just like a little thought that was just kind of like squirrely thought that went by. I never would have imagined that I would have got to that point. So, excuse me. So finally, being incarcerated for 6 months, it did give me a lot of time to think and reflect. But for those first 4 days that I was initially arrested, when I was fasting and praying, you begin to vibrate on a different level when you're going through something, and then you're around other people that are going through their own stuff, and then you're doing the prayer groups, and then you meet other people that are going through their similar, hardships. And I saw the light. I saw the clarity to what I was meant to do in the world. I wasn't just supposed to go through this and be the victim. Mm-hmm. I began to think this thought, and I just let it run my mindset. If the worst thing imaginable can happen to you, Vidal, then so can the best. I kept thinking this. That was my affirmation. Day after day after day, I expected opportunity. I expected great, beautiful things to happen. And that is when I met the girl that I'm with right now. Back then, she was even more drop dead gorgeous than she is now. But what attracted us was our own internal story. It was almost as if we had that same kind of vibration. And what's ironic is she was going through her own trials and tribulations. She was also going through divorce. So somehow we met each other. And then that's when I believed that if opportunity keeps presenting itself, I have to step into it and I have to allow it to come into my life. I have to align with it, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly, if I hadn't gone through the pain of my first husband, there's no way I would have gotten the awesomeness out of my second husband. Like I really truly believe that. Like I wouldn't have learned who I wanted and who I needed to be with a person that I wanted, in order. But it was a lesson, and I mean, don't tell me back then, 12 years ago, that this is going to be wonderful. It's such a lesson, because it certainly didn't
Right.
feel that way, but it is.
Right.
I think that like you said about the pain, when we allow the pain to be a friend, and even if we don't want to be friends with it, but if we get to know the pain, if we can really sit with it and go, this is okay, because I think that we think that pain is a bad thing, and pain is not a bad thing. It just like anger or sadness or shame or any of that stuff. It's not a bad thing. It's the connotation that we give it, right? It's that impression that we give it, like it's a bad thing. But there are times that we have to sit with sadness, or we have to sit with anger, or we have to really know what that's about. What is this sadness about? What is this anger about? What is it that I really want out of life? If this isn't it, then what is it? And when we can do that, and when we can voice that, I think we start looking for it more. Just to your point about focus, we start focusing on what we actually want instead of all this other crap that we don't want. We already know that we don't want this job, or we don't want this relationship, or whatever. Stop focusing on the things that we don't want. Even when women come to me, I'm a health coach too, and when they come to me and they, I'm focused on this weight, I want to lose this weight. Well, don't focus on the weight. Focus on how you want to feel. How do you want to feel? Because if all you're doing is staring at this weight going, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, it stays right there. It's like, you want me to be around so that you can complain about me. And so it's really about where we put our focus. And that's, and what you said, what we put our focus on, it grows. It definitely does. And it's just the same way, whatever we ignore also grows. Like there's always this thing that we're ignoring in the back of our minds. For me, it's whatever work I have to work on that day, whether it's, being more present or whatever. And it's always there. And if I try to ignore a problem, it grows. I mean, my health did the same thing. My health, I had little problems, and then all of a sudden I had giant problems. And it sounds like your life was kind of going the same way. Like all these things were dropping one at a time. And then you were like, oh, well, you solved it by ignoring it. What I consider ignoring with the alcohol is one of those ways that we use to ignore the things that are going on, really, because it's not really solving anything. In fact, it's actually creating a bigger problem.
Right. And it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And that's when I went through this whole incarceration thing. The judge appointed me professional help. At the time, I was seeking church counselors, but they could only do so much. Mm-hmm. And what I did back then was I was looking for somebody. I needed social proof. I was looking for somebody that stayed in my situation and they were happy. And I couldn't find that. I scoured the whole Milwaukee, Wisconsin area here where I live, and I found 2 people. And one of them didn't stay, and the other one was miserable. Mm-hmm. So I knew I wasn't going to be the other guy, but I know obviously that marriage is 50-50. So I know I was a workaholic. I was a person that wasn't fully invested in spending quality time with my kids. And I did it all wrong. And it was a little bit too late to try to fix it. But now, like you mentioned, that's what makes you a better person. The next time around is that you finally put the work in. You do the self-awareness stuff, the personal growth stuff, and you pick up the pieces and you keep moving forward. But you can't have this exponential growth, or what I like to call a thriver's mindset. So there's a big difference between a survivor, someone that's just existing, that has recovered from alcohol addiction or depression or even PTSD. Mm-hmm. You recover, you survive, you exist, you continue to be the person that you were. Now, in order for you to truly thrive and grow exponentially, which is the flip side coin of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the flip side of that is post-traumatic growth. So I'm actually writing a book, and I'm going to feature a lot of the post-traumatic growth new psychology that I've learned, I went through, I experienced, was that I had to let go of all that old identity that I was and learn and master new skills. So from that point, even though I was a blue collar construction guy for 10 years, I had very few skill sets to function in an environment like Wells Fargo or GE Healthcare. But because of this, I was willing to learn and my mind was open because of all the devastation I was in. I was so invested in learning new skills. And this is where personal or post-traumatic growth really comes into play, is people that are ex-vets aren't the only people that go through post-traumatic stress disorder. You also have children that have witnessed a harsh divorce, people that are around cancer patients that they've seen go through a slow death, a person that's been obviously in a big accident, whether it's a car accident, train accident, you're traumatized. So post-traumatic stress disorder, the symptoms for you to be prescribed or diagnosed as PTSD is that you are having bouts of anxiety for 2 to 3 months. So you're using some kind of coping mechanism to suppress the nightmares, the anxiety. So I was diagnosed with PTSD and I didn't know it, and because of all of the things I was going through. So when you have a host of events, traumatic events, so close together, your adrenaline switch is like on. You're like, what else is going to happen? What other nightmare is going to hit me next? Right?
Yeah.
Because you're expecting it. So when you flip it on its head and say, guess what? If the worst thing's going to happen, so can the best. Okay, great. Let me expect that. Let me welcome that into my life. That's the essence of post-traumatic growth. That's the essence of being a thriver, a person that grows exponentially, that they don't go back to being just recovering from addiction, depression. They are a whole new person, which is who I am. I'm not the old blue-collar project construction manager that I was before. I'm an author, speaker, and purpose igniting coach, and people are like, holy cow, how'd that happen?
Right. Yeah. And I talk about surviving versus thriving. I've never heard the post-traumatic growth. I mean, I'm so interested in this. I can't wait to write the book. I'd be interested in reading it. But I talk about surviving and thriving in my book, Inviting Shift. And it goes along with scarcity and abundance, if you ask me. Survival is a scarcity mindset. It's a fear mindset that there's not enough for everybody, that it's always that thought. And I mean, I grew up with this survival mindset. That's how I was taught, basically. There's always this fear behind it. And this, I forgot what I was going to say. I started thinking about my mother, it went off. But when it comes to scarcity mindset, that's what like surviving is. It was like, I can't wait till this, it's always like, I can't wait till the end of this day, the end of the week, the end of the, like, that's what survival feels like. It's always like, right. I can't wait till. And in thriving is, I like my life right now. I'm not trying to rush through time, like that to me, that's like how, in your everyday life, where you are on that scarcity versus abundance line, is that, am I trying to get through this moment to get to the next one, or am I really enjoying every part of my journey all the way to the goal? Because I think I was taught that, you can be happy when your work is done. You can go play when your work is done. And it was always like my happiness had to be held off. So that's what I consider survival mindset. And I'm sure that it's slightly different than what you're thinking about with the post-traumatic. I mean, it's so interesting to think of that. And I think that there's a lot of people in our society that have post-traumatic and, and PTSD and don't know it, because they don't consider their childhood abuse to be traumatic or whatever, because they've always lived with it. They didn't know any different, and yet I know from being a child of abuse that I carry a lot of stories and messages with myself because of that, like things that I don't think about. I really have to go and do the work. and really do the personal growth work to be even able to see those messages. You know, I didn't realize for so long that I could actually go be an entrepreneur, because I was taught you go to college, you get a paycheck, you know,
Right.
you follow the line. And so I think that it's such an important thing to think about. Am I surviving or am I thriving? Because if you're not thriving in life, it gets that, for me, it got to the point where it was like, what am I doing then? Like, why am I here? Why am I getting up every day? And that spiraled into pure depression for me, because I wasn't enjoying it.
I was going to mention this beautiful metaphor that I read that explains the essence of thriving with post-traumatic growth, if I can share this with your permission.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm excited because I love this conversation about surviving and thriving. I think that's another one of my Saturday talks now. I got to write that down.
Awesome. So if we think about 3 trees, so they're all identical trees. So the first tree, a storm, a powerful wind comes into this environment of these 3 trees. The first tree is just like the other 3, right? But there's a difference the way they react. The first tree doesn't bend. Okay, so this was me back when I was a blue collar, hard macho dude. I was stoic. I never showed emotion. Okay, so the wind comes, the tree isn't affected. It's like a sequoia, doesn't move. Okay, the second tree, it bends like a bamboo, just a little bit, but it goes back to the same place it was before. So that's the essence of surviving. Just recovered, boom, went back. Then the third tree got hit by the wind and the storm, and it actually broke a limb. Okay? So this is the essence of me going through all my stuff. But the third tree doesn't go back to what it once was. It becomes something completely different. It actually has new growth out of that break. A whole bunch of branches come out from where the limb was broken. So now it isn't existing as it once was. Now it has created a new shape, a new form, a new identity. It isn't like the other 2. The other 2, you would have never noticed that a storm hit them. But this one, the growth spurted it through, and now it's actually thriving. So that's the essence of thriving and going through post-traumatic growth, is that you don't return to the person that you were.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. That makes so much sense, because if you were to return to the same person, then I would imagine that I would be that person that's just as miserable, but now I want my alcohol or whatever else too, because I've had to give that up. You know what I mean? Like, right. So if what I did in the first place was solve it with alcohol, obviously I need to solve, because I think that alcohol, we use it to mask those symptoms. And the only way to really, really end the symptoms is to get to the root of the problem. And that's where your personal growth and your thriving piece is really getting into, I'm going to do things differently. This is what I need to change in my life so that I don't feel sad, so that I don't have things in my life that I really want to ignore with alcohol or whatever. It's really getting to the root of the problem rather than just the symptoms, which, I really believe that a lot of the alcoholics and the addicts in our society are that way because they're self-medicating in some way, whether they are conscious of it or not, that they are doing it because they're trying to numb something. And the sad thing about that is, you can't numb the bad stuff and just say, oh, I'm going to have the good stuff. Like when we numb things, we numb all the joy, we numb all the good feelings along with the bad stuff. So we're not really living. Again, that goes back to your thought about survival, how we're really just getting through, right? The alcohol is just helping us get through to the next day or through the weekend or until we can drink again or whatever. I've been there where I've wanted to just stay numb for years even. And stepping back out of that, there is a lift, but there's also responsibility, because then after you had that aha, See, a lot of people think you have this aha and it's like life was great, blah. And I mean, that's not how it worked, right? I mean, after that, you had to put in the work, right? It's not like you made this decision and you were just a whole new Vidal. Like, you had to actually start making choices that fell in line with who you wanted to be, where you wanted to go, you know, the type of person you wanted to be in relationship, and how, you know, how much time you balanced your relationship with your work, you know, in order to make sure that you were putting in what you wanted to into a relationship.
It's a process, like you said. It's still a process. Yeah. And I learn every day that old part of me, because those neural pathways are so deep and embedded, like a groove on a vinyl record. You have to create new neural pathways that are deeper by creating morning rituals or creating new habits that replace those coping mechanism type of habitual things that you've done for so many years, or you have modeled because your father was an alcoholic, because your mother, you know, liked to be verbally abusive, so on and so forth. So you have to really step away, and journaling really helped. When I was younger, I used to play basketball. That was my therapy for many, many years. And until I was introduced to writing. And then I fell in love with writing, journaling. When I was incarcerated for 6 months, that was when me and my girlfriend, we wrote each other a lot, tremendously, along with the phone conversations. And it was hard being a father of two, telling my two daughters that I'm working in another state. I'll be there in a couple months. You know, that was the hardest thing for me to deal with, hearing my two daughters cry. And I'm so transparent with them. I told my oldest one exactly what happened. She knows the whole story. And my youngest one, I'm still waiting for her to turn a little bit older. I'm going to share with her, but they've read my story, Chicken Soup for the Soul. I gave them, you know, the Chicken Soup for the Soul Thing Possible books as well. So they know the story. They just
well, and I think that's important for parents, to be honest, because I mean, the truth is we're all figuring it out, you know, and I think back to when I was a kid, I only had one parent, and because she was the Word, you know, she was the Word. I thought she was like God, and I thought she knew everything, and everything she said was right. You know what I mean? Like, and so I thought she should be perfect because there was only one, and, you know, I just thought parents were supposed to be perfect. And it wasn't until several years ago where I was like, wow, you know, she's just as broken as I am, you know, she's just as full of flaws as I am, you know, and that we have to remember. And I think that telling our kids the truth, look, I screwed up. I'm hoping that you won't make this screw up. And that's why I'm sharing it with you, you know, because here's all the consequences I had to pay for this mistake, you know, and so we have to think about that. And I think, yeah, I just think that it really makes us humans to them when we can screw up and take our consequences and model, you know, well, I have to live through my consequences because this is a choice I made.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's so important. So yeah, you're writing a book. What is this? Can you tell us more about the book? Is that the gist of it, that it's about post-traumatic stress?
Yeah, it touches on post-traumatic growth, and it's comprised of my story in the beginning chapters, and then I kind of share thriving principles that I learned, and also I give some coaching and teaching kind of just style of writing. So it's actually a memoir narrative, but with a teaching kind of process embedded in there. And I'm excited about it. I can't wait. We're going to be launching pretty soon here, a couple months. And actually, we're going to be starting the Kickstarter campaign fairly quickly here within the next 30 days.
Neat. Well, do you have a website, or where can people find you? Put a link in there. Is it Facebook? Okay. Where can we find you?
Yeah, actually, I have a podcast called Thrive and Beyond.
Oh, cool.
So if you go to thriveandbeyondpodcast.com, you could actually
I might
listen to some of my episodes.
Pick your brain. I'm thinking about turning some of these Saturday calls into podcasts, but I'm not a podcast person, so we'll have to see what I can do about that.
Hey, I'd love to help you any way I can.
Very cool. Thank you. So it was rough for you. I mean, I'm just trying to comprehend all these things that happened to you at one time. It's amazing that
Yeah,
you
within a
experienced
span of
so
18
much.
months. Sorry.
Wow, within 18 months. I mean, those are major life changes, losing a job or, and then losing a wife and then moving into, going into jail. That's a big life change. I mean, those
Yeah.
were a lot. And sometimes I think that we need those bricks on our head
Hmm.
because that's what I call the something ain't right stage.
Okay, I love
Is
that.
something ain't right. And I'm sure you knew even before you lost, your project manager position that you were like, well, there was probably something from inside saying that, oh, there's these other things that you could do. But you just never, maybe you didn't really look into it. Did you ever think about being an entrepreneur before you lost that position?
Actually, I stepped away from it. I
Oh,
left that whole project manager position behind. A lot of the
you left.
guys, yeah, a lot of the guys there, we would joke around with each other and we'd call each other lifers. Oh, you're a lifer. You're not going anywhere. And
Yeah.
I would tell them this story. I'd say, you know what? If I'm still here when this project is complete by 2008, then take me out to the back and just bury me because I'm not going to be here. So I kept telling myself that same little story over and over again. And then finally it came to that point where it's 2008. This project's done. A 5-year project was complete. They put your name on some big plaque there and they say, okay, thank you for your job. And, you feel like you're part of it. That's great and all. But I felt that I hit my ceiling. There wasn't any more growth there. I knew I was meant for just something greater than
Yeah.
that. As much as I loved and appreciated what I was doing, I didn't know what I was meant to do. And that's how it is when you start this dream chasing journey. You have to just take every step at a time. It's like Jack Canfield tells a story where a car is driving from New York to San Francisco. And all you need to see if you're driving at night is just the 50 feet in front of you, and you're going to make it to San Francisco if you're driving at night the whole way there, right? And
Mm.
that's the metaphor that I kind of like to use on this dream chasing journey, that you don't know what you don't know if you don't start and just keep going.
So just so I can get the wrap up correct, because I want to make sure I get it all right. So your marriage, did that happened right after you left your position, or was that going on before?
So what the events that spiraled that was I left my job in 2009. Actually, January 2009 was the last. That first month that I started, 2008 December, that's when I left. And then I hired a success coach in January of 2009. And then March 24th, that was the day that everything changed. That's when she confessed everything. And then
No.
I ended up in September. So from March until September, that's when I just spiraled downward and I went into this, depression and alcoholic abuse and all that good stuff. And after that, I was incarcerated in March, actually in February of the following year of 2010. And then from February all the way to August, I served 6 months. And I met my girlfriend in October. And that's when we started talking. And I would have never expected that some drop dead, beautiful, gorgeous girl in her 30s would have only been with one other guy before me her whole life. And those are the blessings that sometimes rain down on you when you step into that opportunity, the abundance, what's out there. It was crazy. And on a little side note, this is where it gets even more woo-woo and ironic, is I am 100% Mexican, and my ex-wife is part Italian, so my kids are Mexican and Italian. Well, the girlfriend that I'm with right now, she's part Italian, and her ex-husband was 100% Mexican. So when we first got together, it was crazy, Christina. It was like, you know what? Hold on a minute. Did you cheat? No, I didn't. No, we're good. Maybe we can work this out. It was hard in the beginning. It really was.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. So that was, yeah, that's a very quick time span for all that to happen. That's pretty amazing. So it wasn't just the hours that you were working as a brand new entrepreneur. It was also the hours that you had been spending during your marriage, really, as your project manager, working 80, 90 hours a week. And then all of that combined with your wife's infidelity, of course, that's really the choice. I mean, you were making a choice about how you were going to live your life. It's not like you were just making a choice about your career or relationship or, how you were going to act, but you were starting to, how do I actually want to live my entire life? And that's amazing to me. So what's one more shift that you're working on now?
Well, now it's the shift where I want to be able to speak at 20 conferences a year or more. And I want to be able to write at least one book a year. It's a challenge even writing this book. It truly is. And if it wasn't for my writing coaches and mentors and the network that I've surrounded around me, there's no way I would have been able to ever do this by myself. So I'm definitely indebted to them. There's no doubt. You cannot do this stuff alone. As much as you think you can, there is no way. It's pointless. It's going to take forever trying to do it and learn on your own.
Yeah. No, and I think that goes for internal shifts and external shifts. I mean, whether you need the actual business, how do I click these buttons, or you need, how do I get the right mindset in order to be successful? I think that coaches are so important. I think often a lot of people have a hard time asking for help. And the way I look at it, the most successful people have the most help. I mean, even if you think about, everybody wants to feel like a king or a queen. Well, they have lots of help around. So don't be afraid to ask for help when you need stuff. I think so. And I think anybody who's ever had any kind of addiction or even, mental illness or depression, support is always the first. Like, whenever people ask me what they need, it's always support. Like, go get support first. Get an accountability partner. I don't care if it's a mentor, a coach, a therapist, a friend, whatever it is, get support.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to wrap this up because it's been 45 minutes, but that was a fantastic story. And what will happen is I will actually do a wrap up. I'm several weeks behind on my wrap ups. I may actually be more than a month now. But at some point in the future, you will get a story from me that kind of wraps up your entire shift. And then you can just approve it, because I won't publish it until I'm sure that it's true by you and not by what I understood.
Gotcha.
And then I'll put it out on the blog. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here today. And it was last minute, so I really appreciate that too.
Hey, thank you for having me. It was an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic story. I'm going to